Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Reproductive Justice Webinar. My name is Christian Brooks. I am the Associate for Domestic Issues here at the Presbyterian Church, U.S.A. Office of Public Witness. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend our webinar. As many of you may already know, the Office of Public Witness is the public policy and advocacy office for the Presbyterian Church. Our job is to use General Assembly policy to advocate for a variety of issues, including reproductive rights and reproductive justice. Our advocacy comes in many forms. Sometimes we can go on Capitol Hill to speak with members of Congress. Sometimes we host a rally, and then sometimes we do more educational things like hosting a webinar and sending out action alerts. So we decided to host this webinar in light of the extreme abortion bans that have been, the laws that have been continuing to be passed by several states over the past year. We thought that it was very important to, one, communicate the Presbyterian Church, more specifically the General Assembly's policy on reproductive justice and reproductive rights, as well as give an informational talk on what exactly is reproductive justice and why it's important. So today you will hear an amazing presentation from Reverend Shania D. Leonard on what reproductive justice is, why it is important, as well as what General Assembly is saying about this topic. So before we dive into our presentation, let us have a word of prayer from Jordan Carl, the summer fellow here at the Office of Public Witness.
I invite you to pray with me. Dear Creator God, you have made each one of us in your image, and you've given us the gift of life. We seek to use our lives to do justice for all people and to walk humbly beside you. We pray that all women may have access to safe and affordable reproductive health care. Guide us through the complexities of life and help us to courageously and compassionately do your work. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for that wonderful prayer, Jordan. Now I am pleased to introduce an amazing justice warrior and my mentor, Reverend Shania D. Leonard. Reverend Shania Leonard is a pastor, teacher, consultant, community activist, and justice warrior. Shania has been an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, U.S.A. for over 12 years. A native of Philadelphia, she received her bachelor's degree from the University of Pittsburgh and her Master Divinity from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, my alma mater also. She has been serving communities and congregations in various capacities over the past 15 years. Pastor Leonard has done extensive work within urban areas to eradicate systemic oppression in the areas of race, gender, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic despair. She has spent time doing international outreach in Africa, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic. Furthermore, she is also the moderator of the Pastors' Council for the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, a global network of faith leaders and communities with an affirming theology. Shania believes that God has given her a burden for people who others have disregarded, oppressed, forgotten, or simply don't even see. A modern-day abolitionist, Shania is the founder and former pastor of Judah Fellowship, Western Pennsylvania's only predominantly Black affirming faith community. Reverend Leonard is also the founder of the Pittsburgh Clergy Consortium, the city's interfaith cohort of faith leaders with an affirming theology towards advocacy for the LGBTQIA community. Shania has served several other organizations as past board chair for New Voices for Reproductive Justice, a member of the Pennsylvania State ACLU Board of Directors, and chair of Pittsburgh Mayor Peduto's LGBTQIA Advisory Council, as well as leadership in many other arenas around Western Pennsylvania. Pastor Leonard is often quoted media contributor and an active, outspoken faith voice for justice. Pastor Leonard has done a lot. Shania is also the founding director of Diversity Consulting, an organization that focuses on the education and coaching of individuals and groups around intersectional advocacy and issue-based leadership in the areas of faith, race, justice, and sexual orientation. She currently carries out her justice mandate as the National Associate for Gender and Racial Justice for the Presbyterian Church, U.S.A. in racial equity and women's intercultural ministries for the Presbyterian Mission Agency. Reverend Leonard has received numerous awards, including the recent 2018 Coro Pittsburgh Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Award, the 2018 YMCA Racial Justice Leadership Award, and the 2015 National Black Caucus Innovation in Ministry Award. She resides in Louisville, Kentucky, but travels extensively for the cause of liberation of marginalized people. She lives her life by the mantra, which states, "It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We have nothing to lose but our chains." I know that's right, Reverend Leonard. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Reverend Leonard.
Wow, thank you, Christian. Such a long bio just to say, hey, my name is Shania, and I've been called to do this work. I appreciate this opportunity from the Office of Public Witness, more specifically from the Office of Domestic Issues there in DC. And so I come to you now from Louisville, Kentucky. Most importantly, I'm coming to you from the Hotel Business Center as I'm doing work with World Mission right now in their consultation for communities of color. I'm going to be extensive but brief with you today as I share a presentation about reproductive justice. Understand that I don't consider myself to be the premier expert on this topic. However, I do have a history with it, and I have been working in this area for some time in my work in Pittsburgh. And so if I can just share my screen with you here. Great. And I know that Christian has built in some time at the end for questions. And so I'm going to go through the presentation and then we will move on to questions at the end. Amen. And so we're talking about a Presbyterian lens on reproductive justice. That's our topic for today. So let's talk a little bit first about what reproductive justice is, because it might be something that you might have heard before, but I'm not really sure what it is. And for lots of people, they think that it's all about abortion, and it's not. It's so much more than that, but it's inclusive of that as well. And so here's a comprehensive definition for you. Reproductive justice is the human right for us all to maintain personal bodily autonomy and control our own, I forgot something there, our own gender, orientation, sexuality, work, and all things that concern our own autonomy. The control or exploitation of any of these is reproductive oppression. Reproductive justice is a movement created by Black women and led by women of color in a theory of reproductive freedom for all and an everyday way of life that affirms the multiplicity of our identities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. That's a comprehensive definition for reproductive justice, meaning in layman's terms, it is your ability to control your body, your life, and how you want to live out your reproductive choices. The concept of reproductive justice began to take shape, and this is a little bit of a, I'm going to pause and just say, this is a little bit of a background of reproductive justice from one of the matriarchs of this work, Loretta Ross. And if you can see in the corner, I got the honor of meeting her a couple of times. This is the last time I saw her last year, and we took a picture together. Actually, I'm sorry, that was this year. That was in January when we were at an anniversary celebration. But the concept of reproductive justice began to take shape with members of a Women of Color delegation returning from the 1994 International Conference in Cairo, Egypt. This group of African-American women caucused at the Illinois Pro-Choice Alliance Conference in Chicago, and the group became known as the Women of African Descent for Reproductive Justice. Their purpose, as they were coming together for, was to address the proposed healthcare reform campaign by the then Clinton administration that didn't include or guarantee access to abortion. Not one that the language to really be around choice because of what that communicated about having real choices for communities who were disenfranchised. They integrated the concepts of reproductive rights, social justice, and human rights to launch the term reproductive justice. And so that term gets coined in an article that is written about what they're doing in the Washington Post in 1994. And so when you hear the term reproductive justice, it's a relatively young term from 1994 that starts right here. And this is a direct quote from Loretta Ross. And so I'm going to share a little bit of a video with you that I think you'll find informative and interesting concerning reproductive justice.
Reproductive justice. A lot of people talk about it, but many don't know what it really means. Here's the basic idea. Coined by 12 Black women in June of 1994, the term is a combination of two phrases, reproductive rights and social justice. The new phrase reflected the lives and experiences of Black women in the United States who have been denied a full range of services and protections. Black women have multiple identities, like age, ability, sexual orientation, immigration status, religion, and nationality, just to name a few. Consider the fact that Black women experience some of the highest rates of poverty and only make 63 cents for every dollar a white man makes. Nearly 20% of Black women have no health insurance and die 4 times as often as white women from pregnancy-related causes, regardless of income or educational status. The issue at play here is intersectionality, a term coined by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, which refers to how multiple systems of oppression work together. Reproductive justice is how we take on all the systems that harm us. Reproductive justice is the human right that can only be achieved when all women and girls have the complete economic, social, and political power and resources to make healthy decisions about our bodies, our families, and our communities in all areas of our lives. Reproductive justice centers the leadership and lived experiences of the most vulnerable, including but not limited to Black women, women of color, LGBTQ people, and youth. So there you have it. Reproductive justice has given thousands of women a framework to change policy, improve services, collaborate with other social justice movements towards our collective liberation. For more information, contact In Our Own Voice at www.blackrj.org. Thanks for watching, and welcome to the movement.
Okay. And so that's a little bit of a really comprehensive introduction to a little bit more in depth about what reproductive justice is and how it comes to be. I think what's key that I want to lift up from that video is the idea about intersectionality. Understand that reproductive justice is not just a single issue thing, nor do we live single issue lives. And that concept is once again lifted from Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 and coined by her as a phrase that looks at intersectional oppression. And so when you think about reproductive justice, it's not just an excuse for kids to have access to condoms or for people to get irresponsible abortions. That's not what it's about. It's about looking at all the ways in which folks are marginally oppressed and how reproductive justice is intersectional around a lot of different issues of inconsistent justice in our country. And so let me look at 3 particular terms here to break this down a little bit more. Reproductive health. Reproductive health is a medical framework that focuses on systems of healthcare and access to contraception, STI and cancer screenings, sexually transmitted infections, and sexual and reproductive well-being. So that's reproductive health. That's what takes place in your doctor's office, in your clinics, and your OBGYN doctor, and all those other medical places. Reproductive rights is the legal framework based on constitutional rights, with the landmark Supreme Court case being Roe versus Wade, primarily focused on abortion, choice, and privacy. And so what you see right now in the news, and what Christian referred to in the beginning, is that there are about 10 states that have passed legislation, about 4 more that are moving towards it to look at issues in which they can limit reproductive rights. The whole goal is to get the issue of Roe versus Wade back in front of the Supreme Court for whatever might happen there. And so reproductive rights is the places and is where the legal battle in the courthouse takes place for reproductive rights for all people, and reproductive access for all people. Reproductive justice is when reproductive health plus reproductive rights plus a human rights framework are based on the right to sexuality and pleasure that intersect social justice issues, bringing an intersectional framework to the conversation. Meaning that it looks at the ways in which reproductive health and reproductive rights are targeted from an intersectional base. Meaning that just because I am a young Black woman who needs access to an OBGYN for various issues, it could be for a pap smear, or it could be for an STI screening, a cancer screening, or contraception, meaning you have to look at the other issues that are intercepting that person, whether it be race, social economic status, access as it concerns their environmental health, and all kinds of other issues that come up that are justice issues that are part of the framework for reproductive justice. So if you look at this slide right here, it shows you that reproductive justice is more than just about abortion. It's more than just about getting condoms. It's about food security, gender identity, racial justice, ending incarceration, all of these things, and immigration status, safe communities, decolonization, supporting birth parents, all of these things are connected to reproductive justice. If I don't have clean air, which is an environmental justice issue, then that's connected to my reproductive health. If I don't have paid leave, that's a pay issue that's connected to my reproductive health. All of these things are what's called intersectional. And so when you look at the issue of reproductive justice, you can't look at it in a solo lens or in a cyclone. A cylinder, you have to look at it from the totality of what's going on here. It's about freedom from oppression in a variety of ways. And so the water not being clean in Flint is still a reproductive justice issue. I hope you understand that. Moving right along. So where does reproductive justice live in our country? An organization called Sister Song is a good place to start. Sister Song is a women of color reproductive justice collective that was formed in 1997 by 16 organizations of women of color, primarily Indigenous women, African American or Black women, Latinx or Latino women, and Asian American women, who recognize that we have the right and responsibility to represent ourselves and our communities, and the equally compelling need to advance the perspectives and needs of women of color. This is a phenomenal thing that has never happened before. For these 4 groups of women of color to get together and form this collective coalition is major. It's Southern-based, it's based in Atlanta, and the national membership organizations are from across the country. And the purpose is to build an effective network of individuals and organizations to improve institutional policies and systems that impact the reproductive lives of marginalized communities. And so what you have here is just a couple of pieces that play into the larger puzzle that is Sister Song. Spark is an organization that, and Spark, Sister Reach, the AFIA Center, and New Voices for Reproductive Justice are all 4 organizations that are part of Sister Song, but do individual work in various parts of the country. For instance, the AFIA Center is mainly based in Texas, and specifically Dallas, and the rest of the surrounding areas in Texas to do the work of reproductive justice. Sister Reach is in Memphis, Tennessee, not far from Louisville, Kentucky, to do the work of reproductive justice. And New Voices for Reproductive Justice is an organization which is one of the larger ones that I used to be the chair of the board of. They do work around reproductive justice in all of Ohio and Pennsylvania, and are expanding as we speak. And understand that the work that these organizations do is not just around contraception, it's around faith, it's around youth, environmental justice, and so forth and so on. Because remember, reproductive justice is an intersectional issue. The one little graphic here that I left out in the middle is In Our Own Voice, which is a national Black women's reproductive justice agenda. That is when all these organizations come together and do the work of actually talking to legislators and working to affect policy on the Hill. That's important, that a collective voice of women of color come together for our collective reproductive rights and try to champion those causes with our legislators. That means that is a huge block of women who are a voting bloc, who are a tax-paying bloc, who are a block of people who are directly affected by legislation and hope to have legislation work in their favor as it concerns the work of reproductive justice. And I'll also say that In Our Own Voice is the organization that produced that video that you just saw. 99% of American women have used contraception. So when we think about reproductive justice being an issue that's not related to us or it's someone else's issue, I want you to realize that 99% of American women have used some form of contraception, whatever that contraception may be. That means that 9 times out of 10, really more like almost 10 times out of 10, the woman sitting to your left and to right, the woman down the hall from you, the woman in the apartment below you, the woman in your family has used contraception, which means that reproductive justice is the issue for that person, and it hits close to home for you, and who knows, it might be you. So what does the Presbyterian Church have to say about it? Which is what we all care about, right? We have an understanding of what reproductive justice is. We understand more about how that relates to reproductive rights and reproductive health care. So now, what does our denomination say about it? Which really informs the work that Christian does, and to an extent, the work that I do as well. Well, we have a couple of statements that I want to lift up. The 2006 statement on late-term abortion is here on your screen. The church has a responsibility to provide, and I'm not going to read all of this for you, as you can see on other slides, because you can all read, and we'll make sure this PowerPoint is available to you as well. The church has a responsibility to provide public witness and to offer guidance, counsel, and support for those who make or interpret laws and public policies about abortion and problem pregnancies. Pastors have a duty to counsel with and pray for those who face decisions about problem pregnancies. Congregations have a duty to pray for and support those who face these choices, and to offer support for women and families, and to help make unwanted pregnancies less likely to occur, and to provide practical support for those facing the birth of a child with medical abnormalities, birth after rape or incest, or those who face health, economic, or other stresses. That's huge, and that's important that the church would support such a thing. And like I said, you can continue into more language about that, and you'll have access to this slide. But I want to make sure I get through all 3 of the statements or policies that are lifted up by our General Assembly. This is more into the 2006 statement. I just want to say right here, I want to focus on the final paragraph here. When an individual woman faces the decision whether to terminate a pregnancy, the issue is intensely personal. It may manifest itself in ways that do not reflect public rhetoric or do not fit neatly into medical, legal, or policy guidelines. That's huge. Everybody's story is different. Humans are empowered by the Spirit prayerfully to make significant moral choices, including the choice to continue or end a pregnancy. Human choices should not be made in a moral vacuum, but may be based on scripture, faith, and Christian ethics. For any choice, we are accountable to God. However, even when we err, God offers to forgive us. This policy doesn't say we're pro-abortion or pro-not-abortion or against abortion. This policy basically says that there is a difficult choice being made, and each person has to deal with that choice according to how the Spirit leads them. And that's important. 2008, creation of congregational resources. This is hugely important to me because for the first time this year, I saw a church actually carry this out, and I was surprised and amazed, other than a church that I have pastored. The 2018 General Assembly approved the following resolution that directs the appropriate PCUS entities to redevelop congregational resources, materials, and the subject of reproductive options to more adequately reflect the full spectrum of biblical, theological, and pastoral counsel, while remaining consistent with the policy of the 1992 report on the Special Committee on Problem Pregnancies and abortion, and the 2006 policy that I just read to you. The General Assembly Council report back to the 2019 General Assembly. So this year, I saw a church that actually had pamphlets and condoms and information available for those who needed those resources. It wasn't something that was tucked away that you had to ask an elder or a deacon for. It was something that was readily available by the front door for anybody that needs it. And to a degree, that is what we are called to, according to this particular resolution, that we are to make information that covers the spectrum of biblical, theological, and pastoral counseling options available to those who are in need. That we serve our congregations, we serve the people of God in a way that allows them to make an informed choice according to how the Spirit leads them. 2012 Just Access Resolution. And I won't go in depth into this, was a pretty long one. To protect all women's access to comprehensive health care, including access to health services that enable responsible family planning and honor the exercise of individual conscience. That's huge. Number one, I'm just going to read through that the 220th General Assembly, encouraging the church, its members and councils, and directing the Office of Public Witness, which is what Christian is doing right now, to advocate for full access to reproductive health care for both women and men. That's important. Most people always think it's about women, but it's about all of us. And both public and private health plans, including but not limited to breast cancer screenings. That's reproductive justice, everyone. Your breast cancer screening is about your reproductive justice. Infertility screenings, or your reproductive health, I should say. Medically approved contraception methods, including Plan B and morning after medication. Pap smears, HPV tests, prostate and testicular cancer screenings. That's reproductive health. Pre and postnatal care. That's reproductive health. And in case of problematic pregnancies, adequate and legal access to abortion services when necessary, and directing the Presbyterian Ministry of the United Nations to support similar access to international and aid organizations and programs. That's huge. That shows the progressive nature of our denomination and how we as a church and as a community really look to really empower, to be spiritually conscious, and to really care for the needs of all of our members. And like I said, this Just Access Resolution goes more into an extensive understanding, but I just wanted to read number one, and this will all be made available to you. And I'll leave it on the screen for a second, just in case you wanted to peruse it. Okay, let's move to 2018. Religious freedom without discrimination. That was just last year. Based upon legal and theological understanding of the First Amendment and free exercise of religious consent to those of the Reformed tradition in the United States, the General Assembly resolves to stand against any invocation of religious freedom that deprives people of their civil and human rights to equal protection under the law, or that uses religious freedom to justify exclusion and discrimination. That's major. That's major. For me personally, that's on the same equal level as people using religion to discriminate against people for their race. 2, encourages the state clerk to file or co-file amicus curiae, friends of court briefs, opposing efforts to promote exclusion and discrimination in the name of religious freedom. Directs the Presbyterian Mission Agency, which is what I work for, through the Office of Public Witness, to oppose legislation and judicial efforts to use religious freedom as a justification for discrimination and a denial of equal rights and or equal provision of services or benefits by any legal chartered entity. This one is really important. That's why I'm going through all of it. Affirms the 214th General Assembly statement, guiding principles for ethical decisions concerning religious freedom around the world. Directs the Office of the Stated Clerk, which is J. Herbert Nelson, to send this resolution to every congregation and presbytery, encouraging Presbyterians to distinguish between the historical understanding of religious freedom, and to practice one's faith in current efforts to discriminate against, exclude, and marginalize vulnerable people in the name of religious freedom. That's huge. And so we have the right to advocate for, to talk about, and to even have this webinar right now based on what our General Assembly has said, the resolutions that have been put out, the information that has been moved by the General Assembly. We are simply working right now according to what our church policy has said. There's a theological base that has come from these particular General Assembly mandates that I've just read for you, that support for religious freedom and freedom of choice. And you can see that right there, even going into what our brief statement of faith, and even moreover, the Bellar Confession has said. I'm going to read the last line here. There can be no religious freedom without equal respect for the dignity of all persons, a dignity that is denied when services are denied. When claims of religious freedom become public efforts to exclude and discriminate, we are called to speak up for justice and to stand with the oppressed. So it doesn't matter if you believe in or don't believe in abortion. What we're called to do is to stand up for justice and to stand on the side of the oppressed, which is simply doing what Jesus did. Jesus stood for those who were oppressed and for those who were marginalized. And to be Christ-like, to be a Christian, means to do the exact same thing that Jesus did. And so I wanted to share this as my last little slide here. This is a picture of the last time that the sister song delegation got together, the cohort, the collaborative got together. What you see here is a group of women of color from across the country who are doing the work of reproductive justice. And if you look midways in the picture, on the right-hand side, with one blue suspender sticking out, you'll see me. And my classic not smiling smile, as I was a part of that cohort as well. And in this picture are folks from the organizations of Spark, Sister Reach, the AFIA Center, and New Voices for Reproductive Justice that I mentioned to you before. So what I've given you is a brief, and I do mean brief, comprehensive look into what reproductive justice is, what it's not, what reproductive health and reproductive rights are, how our churches has engaged this issue, and where the work is being done around the country. I hope that answers some questions for you. Like I said, I don't proclaim to be an expert, but I do proclaim to have some knowledge about this, having done the work. And if you look at this picture one last time, you'll see down there in the bottom, and the golden outfit is Loretta Ross. And beside her right now, on the right, is Monica Simpson, who's the current president of Sister Song. Thank you so much for listening, and I am open for questions. And I'm going to turn it back over to Christian.
Thank you so much, Reverend Leonard, for that dynamic presentation. I really appreciate you lifting up the idea and the fact that reproductive justice is not just about abortion. Abortion is an important part of reproductive justice. However, reproductive justice is also about making sure that the 16-year-old girl living in a low socioeconomic neighborhood has access to prenatal care if she decides to keep her child. She has access to adequate medical professionals so that she can have her baby safely. It's not just about abortion. There are so many other aspects of reproductive justice. So thank you so much for lifting that up. And
can I just say really quickly, based on what you just said too, lots of times people talk about Planned Parenthood and that it just exists to give abortions. And that's really a small amount of the work that they do. Most times Planned Parenthood is the only place where young folks and folks who are living in rural areas or marginalized areas can get adequate health care. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of regular health care that happens at Planned Parenthood that's never lifted up because all folks ever see is access to abortion. So thank you for lifting up the young woman who just need just to get a screening or just need to make sure that she has adequate health care in other ways.
Mm-hmm. So I will open this up for questions. If anybody has questions for Reverend Leonard, there is a question and answer box. So you can type your questions into there, or we will also be monitoring the chat box. You can also type your questions into there. So I will wait a few minutes to see if we get any questions. If not, I have a question or two of my own.
So I see that Lucy has lifted up one question. I see there are maybe 3 men in that picture that you just showed. Are male leaders on board with this as much as women are? Absolutely. However, the work of reproductive justice lifts up the voices of women first, Black women first, women of color, and youth primarily, and LGBTQIA folks. And so, yeah, there are definitely men involved in the movement, as you need men involved in the movement. The movement is being led by women. I hope that answers your question, Lucy.
Okay, it looks like someone has emailed a question in and someone else has raised a hand. So again, if you have a question, please put it in either the question and answer chat box or feel free to put it into the webinar chat box.
Someone said, Naomi says, how can we receive the important information you have just shown us? Christian, I'll let you answer that.
So I will be sending out an email to everyone who has registered for this webinar, and I will be sending a link to the video. You will be receiving a link to the presentation as well.
Great. Alina, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly, says, thanks for your presentation, Dr. Leonard. Oh, you're speaking in the future. I'm not Dr. Leonard yet, but I'm on my way. I'm wondering if you have ideas for how we can get involved in the reproductive justice movement. That's a great question. So it depends on what area you're in, because there are organizations that are in each area of the country. I would encourage you to go to the Sister Song website if you're looking to get involved in a civic way. If you're looking to get involved through our denomination, I would encourage you to contact either my office or Christian's office, Office of Public Witness. And she does work on the Hill. I do more practical work around possibly coming to your congregation or your mid-council and having these same kinds of presentations or conversations. And so if you want to get involved in either of those ways, you can contact us. Other than that, I would encourage you to go to Sister Song, and Sister Song is one word, both capital S's, and look at their website and see what organizations are in your area and reach out to them. Thanks for that question.
Okay, and we have a question from MB McCandless. I hope I'm saying your name right. How can white men / white women / white pastors support this work in our predominantly white context?
Well, I think what's important is if we're talking about within the context of the church, let's have this conversation. I would encourage you to invite me out to have a conversation with your congregation or your mid-council, and we can discuss these issues and make folks aware, first of all. And then once we make folks aware, we can talk about how you can be involved as white pastors or white women to affect reproductive rights in the legislative process, or either volunteering with organizations who are doing the work on the ground. And then also, as I said to Alina, contacting Christian's office to see what work you can get involved in and what the Office of Public Witness is doing as well.
All right. What is the relationship of Sister Song and work on reproductive justice with the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, RCRC? The PC-USA has a long historic relationship with the Interfaith Coalition, RCRC.
So I believe they do partner. Although all the organizations within Sister Song have either their own faith coordinator or have a relationship with a faith community too. So understand that Sister Song is a cohort. So it's not an overarching governing organization. It doesn't make the rules for each individual group. However, it is a cohort where they all come together under an umbrella, a collective, if you will. And so, for instance, for New Voices for Reproductive Justice, the organization I used to be the chair of the board for, we had individual connections to larger faith organizations and even to individual churches. And so each organization might have their own work, although I do believe there is a connection between Sister Song and RCRC. And understand too that a lot of the organizations in Sister Song do a lot of their faith work around a Christian framework as well.
And Ann Heyman says, I would lift up both the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, RCRC, and Presbyterians Affirming Reproductive Options as membership organizations that address all concerns mentioned today.
Thank you.
I think there was actually a question about what Presbyterians Affirming Reproductive Options is in the Q&A.
I see that question by Katie. I'm not familiar with that, so I cannot answer that question.
All righty, we are almost out of time, so I will move on with some questions that I have myself for Reverend Leonard. So, Reverend Leonard, we have heard a dynamic presentation today. You have given us a lot of good information. So, what now? What do we do with it? I have my own ideas of what people can do with this information, but what would you say?
So the first thing I would suggest is that if all of this is unfamiliar to you, start making it familiar to you. It's important, especially in our current political climate, that we are informed about the issues. No matter where you stand on them, it's important to have an informed opinion. Number two, know what our church says. Know what our policy is. Everything that we're doing today is operating within the policy guidelines that our church has already given out, that our General Assembly has already mandated. Nothing that I'm saying and doing today is outside of that framework. So know what it is we believe. All the folks, the majority of the folks on the Zoom call here are, I would say, are probably Presbyterians. And so you would ascribe to what comes out of General Assembly. Know what that is. That's important. Number three, I would say, once you begin to inform yourself, get involved. Understand that I believe in intersectionality. And not just in a sense of overlapping systems of oppression, but also in the sense that your issues are tied to my issues. And so if we're ever going to get free and get to a place of equity and equality, then we have to begin to look at each other's intersectional struggles as our own and fight for justice and freedom for all people.
Thank you. And I would also add to that, for those who are more familiar with reproductive rights and reproductive justice, or for those of you who have felt moved by this webinar, educate someone else. Educate them, share the resources that we are about to share with you, because again, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, there are a lot of myths around reproductive justice. And there is a common misconception that one, is only about abortion, and two, it is only for women. It's not just for women, it is also for men as well. So educate someone else. Also, act. Vote in your state and local elections, because as we can see with these, with the different laws that have been passed, a lot of this is happening at the state level. So make sure you are staying involved and know who is running for different offices, and you're voting in your state and local election. And meet with your legislators. Let them know how you feel about these issues. Get friends to go with you. Get a group of people to go with you, and really sit down and talk to your legislators about, one, how you feel about these issues, and two, ask them why they're doing it. What is the purpose of it? And then three, get involved. As Reverend Leonard said, get involved. There are a number of reproductive justice organizations around the U.S. that you can connect with, but also sign up for the Office of Public Witness action alerts. We have things like this, we have webinars, but we'll also be doing some meetings with members of Congress and things of that sort. So I can help you and talk to you about some things that you can do at the local level and help you get a little more involved at the local level.
Can I also lift up too that not only are there RJ or reproductive justice organizations run by Black women, there are also, I want to make sure that it's clear, organizations run by Latinx or Latina women as well as also Asian American women. And so it's literally the movement for reproductive justice is being led intersectionally by women of color, period. And that's important. because there's no other movement that is going on across our country for equity and equality for all people that is led by this intersectional group of women of color.
Mhm. All righty. Well, that is all for our webinar. Thank you so much to all who have participated in the webinar and all who have attended the webinar. Again, we will be making all of these resources available to you, which will include the PowerPoint as well as the video for this webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at christian.brooks@pcusa.org. Or you can email Reverend Leonard at shania.leonard@pcusa.org. Thank you so much for attending and have a great day.
Goodbye.
Bye.